I am Leslie, and I am bringing you an interview with Liza Johnson, who is the director, how nice is that, of Elvis and Nixon. And the thing I love the most, apart from the cast, because the cast is spectacular, is that, you know, as I'm watching the movie, I'm like, well, this is just fabricated. It's a picture, and then you made up the whole story. But that's not true. There's a bunch of stuff in this movie that's true. And I think that's really important for people who want to see the movie to know. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the blending of sort of the imagination of what might have happened and the real story involved?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot more of the story is true than I assumed when I first read it. And there's certainly a lot of historical detail that we worked to create when we knew it, right? So that, for example, the suits that Michael Shannon wears in the movie are literally cut from the same patterns that Elvis's tailor made his suits from. They're just made in Elvis's size, in Michael's size instead of Elvis's size, you know. And or the car that Jerry Schilling drives in the movie is the exact make and model of the car that Elvis bought for Jerry Schilling, and you know, and there's all kinds of things like that that we really worked to make correct to the period and correct to the actual details of this story. And so much of the story is true, and I really didn't expect it. And then and there's documents and accounts of the story all over the place, right? So that when Elvis is flying to Washington, D.C., he writes a letter to Nixon. And that document really exists. It's in the National Archive, where I'm going to be tonight.
Oh, nice!
And it, you know, they read it word for word in the movie, and that's literally what it says. And it, I think that all of that seems so surprising that, you know, people might actually doubt the things that come straight from documents from the National Archives, right? Like the idea that Elvis is flying on a plane and he gets a piece of American Airlines stationery
with horrible handwriting.
And I mean, according to Jerry, this is one of 4 letters that Elvis ever wrote in his life, you know, and he just wasn't a big letter writer, you know, and so people even doubt the things which are the most verifiably true because it seems so unbelievable.
And for him to walk up to the White House.
He walked straight up to the northwest gate of the White House and sort of talked that letter's way in, you know, and that's literally what he did, which seems unbelievable, but that is what happened, you know. And so actually much more of the story is true than I would have thought. And I think, you know, with any historical fiction, what you do, honestly, even with any kind of history, you take the data points that you can find, and then you have to draw, you know, connect the dots between them. That's what real historians do, and that's what historical fiction does, right? And what we tried to do as we connected the dots was to try to think about, and this is what I think fiction can do better than some kinds of documentary history, right? Is we just tried to stay honest to certain kinds of emotional truths, right? So, for example, Jerry Schilling's book was kind of a through line for me, and it goes through his entire life history with Elvis, starting when he's a kid on the playground meeting Elvis until and beyond the death of Elvis. And in that, you learn the ways that Jerry really maintained his friendship with Elvis for his whole life, often by taking measures of distance at certain moments, which not everyone did, and some of those friendships collapsed pyrotechnically in well-known ways, you know, but Jerry, by taking a step back at times, stayed friends with Elvis forever. Not every element of him taking distance happened in the Oval Office or on that day, right? Some of them might have happened the following Friday, some of them might have happened 2 years later, but they did happen, right? And so there's a way that you could say that it is an alteration of the truth to put them in the time frame of this movie. But at the same time, if you leave it out of the story, then does that make it more true or less true? Because that did really happen, and if you don't tell it...
Right. But and that brings me to 2 things. First is, that Cary Elwes, who is Wesley and The Princess Bride, actually co-wrote the screenplay, and I find that fascinating, and I've interviewed him and think he's a lovely guy. So I'm very interested in how he got involved in that, or what part he plays in the building of the script to its final bit. And then also Alex Pettyfer being hired, who for the first 10 minutes I'm like, who the hell is that? Oh my god! And he's so good. And I mean, I've always thought he was good, and I was like, when's he gonna have a real role? You know, because he's been in some of those funky roles that are like very teen bopper, you know. But I've always seen that.
Almost like something that would happen to Elvis, actually.
Right. Yeah, and he's very pretty, and they made him look like Jerry. Yeah.
Who is actually also very pretty.
He was a good-looking dude. Yeah, and especially at the time.
Yeah.
You know, because he's older now. But I love that casting, and I'm fascinated by Cary. So if you could talk about those.
Well, Cary wrote the script with two friends of his, Joey Sagal, who, among other things, is an Elvis imitator and a huge fan of Elvis, and Hanala Sagal, who at the time was married to Joey. And I wasn't there, and there's a long backstory to the movie, as there is often, yeah. And so I wasn't there at the inception of when they got this idea, but I have the impression that they were just standing around looking at the photograph, and when they started talking about it, their sort of excitement and interest about what could have been happening in there, sort of one thing led to another, I think. I will say that one day when we were shooting the big set piece in the Oval Office, I looked out and I saw a man that I had never seen before, kind of at the monitors, maybe talking to Kevin Spacey or something. And, you know, the crew was lighting and everything, and I was like, I think I'll go over there and see who that is.
Being the director and all, I think you can.
Yeah, and well, often you can't because you're working, but at that moment, I could.
Oh, good.
And I went over there, and Jerry Schilling, who was on set that day, with Alex Pettyfer, who's styled to look exactly like the young Jerry Schilling, had called Bud Krogh, like the real historical Bud Krogh. And Bud Krogh had come to set and was there sitting next to Colin Hanks, who is styled to look as much like Bud Krogh as humanly possible. And they're talking to Kevin, and I went up and introduced myself to Bud Krogh. He was like, how did you get the idea to do this movie? And I said, well, I didn't write it, actually. And he said, oh, well, who did write it? And I was like, well, you know, Joey Sagal and Hanala Sagal, and then the actor Cary Elwes. And, you know, Bud Krogh is like a person who was a significant government official, you know, who was very earnest about governmental projects. You know, he did time for Nixon.
Right, yes.
Okay? And he looks at me, and he was like, Cary Elwes? And I said, yeah. And he starts doing scenes from The Princess Bride for me. And I just was like, okay, this cannot get any more surreal.
It become a weirder day.
Yeah.
So did Cary come onto the set at all?
Yeah, he came the next day, and actually Bud did some scenes from The Princess Bride for Cary.
Oh, I'm sure he loved that. He has a lot of love for that role, I think, so that's nice. But it's good to see him getting, you know, expanding and doing some...
I think he's a great writer.
Oh, yeah. Well, he certainly... I mean, I don't know who did what in the script, but I thought it was very...
I don't either, and, you know, because I wasn't there and it's predates me, what I think is that it's right just to treat them as an honest-to-God writing team, and I think sometimes in a collaboration at a certain point you don't even know who did what. At least in a good one.
Right,
you know?
Absolutely. We have Kevin Spacey and Michael Shannon both starring in the movie, playing really iconic characters, and what I would imagine is the most fun was working and seeing the two of them bounce off each other as actors, because they're both so good in so many different aspects of their artistic career as actors. So can you talk a little bit about maybe something that surprised you, and if there were any improvisations or anything about their working together that surprised you?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I'm heartened to hear you say that, because I really think that it was important for the movie that not only do you see these characters who are giant in their scale coming together, but that you feel almost like a clash of the titans, like who's gonna be winning the acting battle of the century.
Oh, yeah,
you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
especially for people who love stage acting.
Yeah, and I think that what interests me the most about cinema is the way that, you know, all kinds of reactions and fugitive gestures and stuff can be ephemeral. You only have to do them once. It is different from the theater. You know, you don't have to be able to repeat it. You just have to be able to do it once. And I feel at least that you can see the pulses of fun that they're having, or just that interest, that their own level of interest as they're honest to God listening to each other and reacting in real time. I actually think that's true of the other characters in the film too.
Yeah.
We shot this scene first, and so I think it really set a tone that that's what we're doing in this movie, is honest to God responding to each other, you know, and anyway, I'm very heartened to hear you say that.
Did you take a lot of takes
yes.
of the two of them together?
Uh-huh.
And how, I mean, because they're both so, they spark, you know, they make a lot of different choices as actors. So how diverse were the finished takes of the scenes that they worked on together?
It really varies, but they did add some improvisations, and Michael commented yesterday that Kevin added a lot of really good buttons on the end of scenes, which is certainly the case. And one of my favorite improvisations, I'm sure that Michael did not tell Kevin that he was going to do this before he did it, but like when they're doing the scene with the knuckles, you know, that it was scripted that he makes Nixon slap the knuckles, but there's one, the first time we did that scene, Michael Shannon improvises Cambodia. and none of us knew he was going to say that, and I think it was honest to God as surprising to Kevin as it you know, as it is supposed to appear surprising to Nixon, and I think, you know, in a way that to me that's a beautiful example of what improvisation and surprise and people who can really respond in the moment, what that can do.
The way it works the best, the entire film, the way I think it works the best is that Michael Shannon is really coming at it from an interior place, and Kevin Spacey comes at it from an external place in, and I think that's a very interesting mix of the two of them together, where Michael Shannon doesn't really look like Elvis, and it doesn't matter because he so embodies him, and I think that's a very interesting thing for people who want to see the film, not just because of the story, but because of the actors.
It's also the opposite of the way that we culturally generally think about each figure, you know, where Elvis is the most familiar surface in the world, probably of anyone, and you know, I really think in a way he's also the most profound Warhol painting, you know, because of the way that he is just like this constantly replicating iconic surface, and no one ever thinks about his inner life. Whereas Nixon, everyone's like, now that's a complicated psychological man, and no one ever thinks about his outer life. And
that he likes M&Ms and needs everything perfect.
Or that how does he hunch or lurch, or these qualities that are, you know, physically
expressive,
visible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, that I think is, and it's very funny. I mean, I think you know, when you see the picture, you're not really sure what did happen, and then this mixture of these actors playing these roles, and then the story itself, and then them embodying. But at the same time, there's a whole sort of thing that goes through it. That's the story of Jerry and Elvis. That brings some poignance to the story.
I think so too, and you know, I've gotten to know Jerry Schilling through this process, and I think he's such a wonderful person. He's also a wonderful writer. Like, the voice of his book, I think, is very special. It's clear at every moment that he adores Elvis, and it's very intimate, but he also kind of has an overview, and he understands everything that anyone else has ever thought about Elvis, and that's a lot, you know, and he can sustain his love and affection and analyze him at the same time, and that's very unusual, and you know, and he really became our most profound collaborator on the project for me and for the actors. He's the one who found Alex.
He had 5 people. Yeah,
he gave Alex access to his life. He took Mike to Memphis. He took him to Graceland After Hours. He took him to Lauderdale Courts, where Elvis was a kid, and you know, like he took Mike everywhere that Mike wanted to go in Memphis, and he was there with us on set to. I think we would have tried to do this even in his absence, but in his presence, there was no way that we were going to fail to, well, or at least fail to try to be accountable to what their friendship meant and the sort of emotional truth of the situation, both within their friendship and as far as Elvis's journey goes, you know. So he really was a great collaborator, and I think that is why those intimate moments play well in the film. And I also think that, you know, there's something kind of sparkly and exciting about the Oval Office scene, but I think that you could get to the end of the movie and be like, okay, so Elvis went to meet Nixon, so what? Do you know? But it's really the depth of the arc of their friendship and the depth of the Elvis character that makes it even meaningful that he ever went. Do you know what I mean? So that it's not just like a kind of sketch comedy, but actually I don't want to take away from the comedy of situation, because I do think it is very funny. But
there's more to it.
But that's the thing about comedy, is that like usually it's funny because it means something, and I wouldn't know how to explain exactly what that comedy means, but I think that because it's attached to the work that the actors are doing to show you the arc of these characters, that it ends up, it can be kind of, I think it's delightful, but it doesn't feel frivolous to me because we know where we are in their journey.
Well, I'm really hoping that people who are not only, I mean, you've got fans of Elvis and fans of Nixon and fans of these actors, and then of a woman director. So all you women out there who want to see something interesting, film, you know, directed by a woman, that would be also a good reason to see this film. And then, you know, it's just fun. It's just you know, I think a lot of times it's too heavy, it's too light. I think it's a really good mix of the two.
What I think is that to be a director, you have to be able to do a range of things, some of which are more culturally associated with femininity, and some of which are more culturally associated with masculinity, right? So when people describe my style, they always focus on the kind of feminine terms, right? And it is true that I think that my best thing is that I can identify people's best work and support and amplify it, right? Any man director who's worth his salt can also do that.
Right.
When I do it, people will call me nurturing, and when Mike Nichols do it, they'll call him a genius, right? But but the thing is, the work of that
That's
is
a
the
problem.
same. And also, you know what? It isn't. We all get the work done. It's fine.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
But people
like,
have to change the way they're seeing that, because there are a lot of women out there doing amazing work, and it's not needing to be.
Well, and additionally, any director worth his or her salt also has to be able to take a punch, and also has to be able to land one. And there, you cannot get through a movie unless you can fight for your vision and win, right? And also, your actors aren't going to be okay unless they know that you have their back, right? And like, so when I do that, I do it in a more feminine style probably than many male directors. But I can guarantee you that there's not a man in my movie that doesn't know that I can land a punch for them, you know, and their work would not be as good if they didn't feel that, right? But still, most people would not describe me as like this kind of boxer, right? Because my style of punching is kind of girly, do you know? And so I think the point is that no man, woman, or third gender can direct a movie without being able to do all of those things, but the style in which we enact those gestures, you know, is going to be informed by, like to me it's like a Ginger Rogers backwards in heels thing. Like I'm not sure it's harder for me to do it backwards in heels, but I've been doing it backwards in heels all my life, so that's how I'm going to do it. But it's the same work, it's just that our styles of working, like our styles of anything, might be different.
Well, I think something people should think about is Michael Shannon, very masculine guy, and yet he chooses to work with a woman director. So that speaks to, you can get whatever done that needs to be done, and you can do it for whoever is in front of you as a director. Yeah, I think that's what everybody should bear in mind. Thank you so much.